in following the spirituality of the divine milieu, the phenomenon of man, this poor priest got himself possessed, under the control of a demon, and was totally unaware of it. And the irony of the situation was that the priest who was appointed by the bishop to exorcise him was also possessed, and he didn't know it either. And he had been his professor in the seminary, the exorcist, and who had introduced this young priest into Teilhard de Chardin. And through following his spirituality and his ideas, even the exorcist discovered that he had fallen under the mind control of Satan. There are various degrees of possession. It doesn't take place all at once. It begins with a Ouija board or tarot cards or fortune tellers, or begins with astrology. And that's when we first open the door to Satan in our lives. He avoids this bizarre behavior that we saw in the movie Exorcist because he doesn't want people to know he's there. He doesn't want even his victim to discover that he is gradually taking over his or her life. He knows the first thing they'll do is go call an exorcist, and that's the last person in the world he wants to see. And there are various degrees of possession till finally you reach that perfect degree we saw in the instance of Adolf Hitler, where a demon is able to imitate perfectly the personality of his human victim, whose own consciousness he has completely suppressed. And according to Marilyn Ferguson, in her book on the New Age movement, the Aquarian Conspiracy, and of course, according to your own Mrs. Constance Cumby here in Detroit, there are far more people possessed today than we realize. All these new methods of meditation, Eastern spirituality, are really short courses in how to get yourself possessed. Transcendental meditation, EST, Earhart Seminar Training, Silva Mind Control, biofeedback, yoga, stress management programs, techniques, New Age spirituality, the mind sciences, Anchor Hold, which is being introduced as a form of spirituality among Catholics, A Course in Miracles. All of these are methods to get oneself under the control of a demon. Silva Mind Control, I can speak from experience. I started to take his program. I was talked into it by another priest. They don't tell you in the beginning that eventually they're going to have you communicating with higher intelligences from out of space. This is all part of the occult. You're not told in the beginning what you're getting into, until finally you reach a point, I'm afraid, where it's too late. Well, one weekend of that, I got as far away from those people as I could get. Father Matthew Fox, a Dominican, has established out in California his Center for Creation-Centered Spirituality. This is simply another technique to get oneself possessed. This is why he brings in people like Starhawk, a registered witch, to teach in his program. It's basically a reversion to paganism, to nature worship, to the worship of creation. And that is the very trap into which Teilhard de Chardin himself fell. According to a recent Gallup poll, at least 10 million Americans have dabbled in this Eastern mysticism and are in some degree of diabolical possession. Well, these are the shock troops, the advanced troops of the Antichrist, who will be marshaled under his flag when he unleashes his reign of terror on the earth. The Bible tells us that the Antichrist will have complete control of all the real wealth of the world. Daniel chapter 11 says he shall control the riches of gold and silver. I'm sure there's some here this afternoon who can remember when we had gold and silver coins. And that's real money, because it has a real intrinsic value. I remember when I was a youngster, even the dollar bill, I'd sometimes receive one for a birthday, and as you can imagine, as a youngster, I would examine it very carefully. I would always notice it used to say, redeemable in silver from the United States Treasury. But if you've examined a dollar bill lately, you will notice it no longer says that. Instead, it calls it a Federal Reserve note. All real money was taken from us, at least the gold, in 1932 by Franklin Delano Roosevelt. And our silver was taken from us by Nixon in 1971. And in its place was issued this paper money, which has no intrinsic value. As it itself said, it's a Federal Reserve note. And a note is legal jargon for an IOU. It's really just a piece of paper. No, all real wealth has been taken from the American people and concentrated in the hands of the minions of the Antichrist. They say even our gold at Fort Knox is no longer there. It's all been assembled in deep vaults in Geneva, Switzerland. So just what is this piece of paper worth? It's not worth silver anymore. It's not worth gold. Well, it's worth whatever the Federal Reserve says it's worth. By printing more of them, as they did during the presidency of Jimmy Carter, they decreased its value. The more dollars there were, the less each was worth. Or they can print less of them. They can constrict the money supply. They can call these in on loans. And then they can cause a depression. Mr. Alan Greenspan, who presently is the chairman of the Federal Reserve Board, he wrote an article in 1958, and he said that the Federal Reserve manipulation of currency, or the money supply in the 1920s, is what brought on the stock market crash of 1929. And Mr. Greenspan says, quote, caused the American economy to collapse. All the Fed, as it's called, has to do is call in its loans and limit the money supply. Well, this is when brokers then have to call in loans that they've made to their clients. And this is when the clients have to go out and sell their cars and watches and rings or whatever they can to pay off the brokers. And this causes a chain reaction in a nation, and this is what brought about the great crash of 1929 and the depression of the 1930s. Our lives, our fortunes, and our honor today are at the mercy of the Federal Reserve Board. And I'm sure most of you think that it's just another government agency. The Federal Reserve System is no more a part of our federal government than is Federal Express, the overnight package delivery people, or the federal dry cleaners. The Federal Reserve System is a private corporation owned by private individuals. It is a secret corporation. It is so secret, it is the only corporation in America that does not have to publish the names of its principal stockholders. Every other business corporation in our country has to have on file a list of its principal stockholders that are open to public inspection. The only private corporation that doesn't have to do this is the Federal Reserve System. So we don't even know who owns it. It's the most secret, mysterious corporation in America. And it's probably owned by the international bankers, by the Rothschilds and the Warburgs and the other international bankers, to whom we American taxpayers owe the national debt. You know, sometimes the press will tell us, well, don't worry about the national debt, we owe it to ourselves. Well, if we owe that national debt to ourselves, why do we have to pay $100 billion a year in interest on it? Though that national debt is owned by international bankers. And this is how the Antichrist will gain control of the world. As Meyer Anschel, the founder of the Rothschild banking dynasty, said, I don't care who makes your laws. Just let me print your money. Because he who prints the money controls the economy, controls the nation, and even controls the Congress that makes the laws. The Federal Reserve System is so secret you cannot even audit it. Now, every corporation in America is open to audit by the federal government. In 1978, a congressman introduced a law in Congress to audit the Federal Reserve. It's never been audited. But he wanted to find out what they're doing with all our money and why they've imposed this tremendous debt on the American people. By the time that law got through Congress and was passed, it said just the opposite. The Federal Reserve may not be audited. That tells you the control the Federal Reserve has over our Congress. That it can take a law introduced by a congressman and make it come through exactly opposite to what was intended. Though the Federal Reserve System is part of that great deception of which St. Paul spoke in his letter to the Thessalonians. In other words, it's a central bank that controls all the other banks in our country. And did you know that a central bank is the third plank of the Communist Manifesto, written by Karl Marx in 1848, nearly 150 years ago? If you have never read the Communist Manifesto, I would urge you to go to a large public library and get a copy. You're in for the shock of your life. The first plank of the Communist Manifesto is a federal income tax. Karl Marx was the first one to propose a federal income tax on all wage earners in a country. The second plank is to substitute paper money for real money of gold and silver. Everything that Karl Marx laid down for the economic enslavement of a nation is already in place right here in America, including women's liberation, the destruction of marriage and family life for the sake of so-called women's liberation. Even this is spelled out by Karl Marx. So where is the reign of the Antichrist in the world today? Well, it's in Russia, where you have the economic enslavement of an entire people. It's in China, where these people are nothing but slave laborers for the Communist Party. The reign of the Antichrist is in Cambodia, where 3 million Cambodians were slaughtered by their own government. It's in Vietnam, it's in Laos, it's in Poland, Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, and right here in the United States. We are under the Communist Manifesto already. And this is what Daniel warned us about. He said most people would be totally unaware that they were being taken over by the Antichrist. When did our beloved America fall under the control of the Antichrist? We know the exact date. January the 20th.